appreciate the opportunity to be asked to participate in this. In my line of work, being an imposter or having imposter syndrome is a typical thing, and when I was asked to participate in this, I immediately felt like an imposter. I don't feel like that I'm on the caliber of teaching or preaching that most of the men here are. As a matter of fact, when Jonathan asked me to do this, I said, well, why don't your dad do it? Your dad has done this before. As a matter of fact, I have the copy of the 1994 and 1999 preacher studies in print whenever both Ron and others have, and Doug and others have given exposition or talked about the book of Daniel. And so there are men that are much more capable than me to do this, but nonetheless, I've been asked and I've accepted, and so we'll do our best. I'll further kind of give some gratitude at the end, maybe after the Q&A, and I see how that goes. Daniel chapter 7. Finding continuity in chaos. Nathan mentioned in the book of Matthew that there is a level of chaos that exists. Really, it's a pseudo level of chaos. There's a lot of people who look at the book of Matthew and they see chaos. There's not true chaos there. God did not create chaos. And here in the book of Daniel, God is not the reason that chaos exists. As a matter of fact, we're going to notice in Daniel chapter 7, as God looks down from the heavens with Daniel and observes this chaotic sea, it's not because God has created that chaos. Also, throughout the book of Daniel, people find chaos throughout it, but there's not true chaos. It's because they're attempting to understand Daniel without any type of structure. Nathan mentioned that there are types of literature which cannot be understood without considering the structure. Daniel is one of them. This is the overall book structure of Daniel. Daniel has a lot of unique qualities. It's actually written in 2 different languages, first of all, and there's no other book that has a couple of different languages like this in the Old Testament. It has an Hebrew introduction to an Aramaic chiasm, which is going to be chapters 2 through 6, 7. It's actually 2 through 7. 2 through 6 is going to be considered narrative, while 7 through the remainder of the book are going to be visions. 7 is an Aramaic introduction to a Hebrew chiasm in the latter part of the book. We'll notice that throughout. There's a lot of things that I'm going to throw out there that I'm not going to mention further because this is about chapter 7. But we have to go through the rest of the book to build a little bit of framework so that we can understand chapter 7. To understand Daniel, we're going to attempt to use Daniel. Many people have attempted to understand Daniel and are not using the rest of Daniel to understand it. And you won't understand it if that is the attempt. We have to understand the scope of Daniel too. Now there's going to be some objection to this, I'm certain. Some take the position that the scope of Daniel only leads up to the inauguration of the kingdom. I'm going to take the position that the scope of Daniel goes beyond the inauguration of the kingdom, through the kingdom, and all the way to the consummation or the closing of the kingdom. I think the scope is that broad, though I think there are chapters that are more limited than that entire large scope. Here's some additional context that I'm not going to go through. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you know some of that context already. I will note this, that chapter 1 is a foundational chapter to the remainder of the book. We see a chiasm in chapter 1, and it's a pretty simple chiasm. At the beginning, we see that Nebuchadnezzar is introduced as the king of Babylon. You might remember in Deuteronomy chapter 28 that God had promised a curse. God is faithful to keep his promises, all of his promises. He is faithful to keep his promise to curse. Whenever we see Babylon come onto the scene, that's what we're supposed to think about. Later on in chapter 1, we see that Daniel is faithful himself. That's key. We're going to notice another figure who is faithful later on in Daniel. At the end of Daniel, we see that Cyrus is introduced. In Isaiah, Cyrus is called a Messiah. He is a type of Messiah. He is a Messiah for their day. He is the reason that they're able to leave Babylonian captivity and to go back to Jerusalem. This is a theme that's going to be carried out throughout the remainder of the book. That's important. Notice that we have some larger biblical themes in which Daniel fits nicely. In Genesis, we might notice that in chapter 2 and verse 7, God's going to give this promise. He's going to say that thou shalt surely die. He's going to say that if you do such and such things, you're going to surely die. He's going to admonish them to be faithful. He's going to speak to Adam and to Eve. And he's going to say that if you do or if you don't, he's admonishing them to be faithful. Then we're going to notice in chapter 3 and verse 15, the first messianic promise, God is promising that he will deliver. This is a large biblical theme. We see this in the Revelation. If we go to chapter 2 and verse 5, we see that God is in control and he is faithful to curse. He's going to say, repent or else. He's saying this, of course, to the churches that are there, which this echoes to us even now. Moving forward in chapter 2, verses 7 and verse 10, he's going to give an admonition to do what? To be faithful, to overcome. At the end of Revelation, he's going to give this promise of a crown of life. He does that early on too, but at the end, he's going to give this final admonition, or this final promise rather, to deliver. We see this throughout Daniel. We just noticed that in chapter 1. As we start to open up the book, we see that God has promised and he is faithful to curse. We see Daniel is faithful, and finally, God is faithful to deliver. The narrative structure, chapters 2 through 7, Nathan has already gone through this, and I appreciate it because he's going to save me a few minutes. So I'm not going to go through the narrative structure. There is another chiasm that exists. There are two more chiasms that exist actually in the book of Daniel. That has to do with the visions, and then there's a broad scope chiasm we'll get to in just a moment. So here are the visions. Chapter 7 is a hinged chapter. Chapter 7 ends one chiasm and it begins another chiasm. We'll notice in just a moment that 7 is going to be the climax of another chiasm. 7 is absolutely a hinging chapter. To George's question earlier, is the top of the chiasm or the climax, is it the most important part of a chiasm? No, not necessarily. Sometimes. Sometimes it's the basis of a chiasm, which is the most important. Sometimes it's the entire chiasm. It's not meant to emphasize one particular point. The whole thing is important. And so that's important to understand when it comes to chiasm. When it comes to the visions, chapter 7 and chapters 10 through 12, they are on the same level of the chiasm. You'll remember in chapter 7 that God is faithful to reign. He will judge. We're going to notice some judgment language whenever we get to chapter 7 here in just a moment. But the judgment shall sit. The saints shall possess the kingdom. In chapters 10 through chapters 12, which is all one vision, we see that God is faithful to reign. He is faithful to deliver. Have we already noticed that? Yes, in chapter 1, we already noticed that that is built upon that early theme. God is going to deliver. He says to Daniel, through his angel, that thou shalt rest and stand. That's important. He tells Daniel, it's time now to rest, but you're going to stand. And at the end of the days. Chapters 8 and chapters 9 are also on another level, but on the same of a chiasm. Chapter 8 is that period which is preceding the coming of the kingdom. We know this. We go to verses 20 and 21 of chapter 8, and the angel Gabriel has told us explicitly what the ram and the he-goat represent. He tells us this is Medo-Persia and Greece. It's very nice that he just straight up tells us exactly what's going on here. Chapter 9 also is the time leading up to and including the time of the Messiah, the opening of the kingdom. In verse 25, he's going to say, unto the Messiah. Do you see that chapter 8 and chapter 9 are clearly limited in scope? The message that comes from Gabriel. This is important. I think that we have been taking Gabriel for granted and his placement both in Daniel and what he's able to give us whenever he's introduced in Luke. Gabriel is a messenger angel. No other place do we see Gabriel acting outside of being a messenger angel. Some have taken Gabriel to be the additional angel that we see in chapter 10, who's a warrior angel. The warrior angel, which is seen in chapter 10, is very different than the angel that we see as Gabriel. In Luke chapter 1, you know what Gabriel does at first. He comes and he introduces us to the man who is going to prepare us for the time of the Messiah, John the Baptist. Then he's going to come to Mary, and he's going to tell Mary that the Messiah is at hand. The Messiah is coming. Do you know what what Gabriel did in Daniel chapter 8? He tells us about those kingdoms which will prepare the world for the fourth kingdom, at which time the Messianic kingdom will come. Then in chapter 9, he introduces the Messianic kingdom. Chapters 8 and chapters 9 are limited in scope. Chapter 7 and chapters 10 through 12, I believe their scope is broader. I think that they include the inauguration of the kingdom. I think that they include the war period of the kingdom, which is the period we're in right now. The open kingdom. The kingdom is open for entry. But I think that these chapters also speak to us about the time of the end, the closing of the kingdom. He uses this language, time, and the dividing of time in verse 25. Then it is also used in chapter 12 and verse 7. We'll get more specific into that here in just a little bit. The third broad structure would exist is built upon chapter 1, which we've already noticed. In chapter 2, we notice that God is faithful to reign. He speaks to us about the latter days. Nathan mentioned chapter 2 earlier. This is where Nebuchadnezzar, of course, he sees this huge image of which he is the head of gold, but we notice that the stone that is cut without hand crushes it and all the other kingdoms to powder. God is in control, and God is faithful to reign, and God sees it all the way to the end of the latter days. In chapter 7, we see that God is faithful to reign, and the Son of Man is faithful. Who was faithful in the middle of chapter 1? Daniel was faithful in the middle of chapter 1. We see who is faithful in the middle of chapter 7, when he who is like unto the Son of Man comes near unto the Ancient of Days. This is the same scene of Revelation chapter 5, whenever the Lamb is the only one who is worthy to approach the throne. See, the Son of Man is faithful. In chapters 10 through 12, God is faithful to reign, and finally, God is faithful to deliver, as we already noticed, chapter 12 and verse 13. A couple of things that we see from chapter 2 through 7 into 10 and 12 is this recapitulation. Recapitulation is the fancy word for recap. We might say that I'm going to recap something. The long way to say that is recapitulation. We see recapitulation of two important things. We see recapitulation of the latter days throughout Daniel, and we see recapitulation of the Son of Man figure. He's called a stone cut without hands in chapter 2. He's called the one likened to the Son of Man in chapter 7. In chapter 10, he's going to be one who wears a gold belt, and one whose eyes is brilliant, and his appearance is brilliant, and his voice like a multitude. We're going to notice some more passages that speak to that in just a little bit. In chapter 7 now, let's get to the structure of chapter 7. At the beginning of chapter 7, we notice that Daniel is sleeping. Of course, he's going to have this vision, and he's going to see these beasts which come from the sea. But before he sees that, he's going to be found resting. In the middle of Daniel chapter 7, 19a, we'll notice that Daniel is troubled, and he's inquisitive. At the end of chapter 7, it says that Daniel is left troubled. It says that my cognitions much troubled me. You know that we're supposed to be left in suspense at the end of chapter 7? We are left in suspense. Daniel is in suspense at the end of chapter 7. He was resting to begin with. He's left in extreme suspense at the end of 7, even though he has seen the throne of God and he has seen great hope. He is still left troubled. At the end of chapter 12, he tells Daniel to rest. He tells Daniel to rest. This is a bookend at the beginning of chapter 7 and the end of chapter 12. Between verse 1 and verse 19, we see that Daniel first observes this vision, verses 2 through 14. We're going to see the first interpretation in verses 16b through 18. The first interpretation is going to be a summary interpretation by the angel. One thing I forgot to mention is I want you all to get out your Bibles and follow along, because I'm not going to read all these verses. I'm making reference to them so that you can read them and you can fact check right now and then fact check me later again. We see that first interpretation by the angel, verses 16 through 18. Between those verses, we see that Daniel is grieved and inquisitive. After he sees the vision, he's troubled. And then he gets an interpretation. He's troubled again. In verses 19b through 20, Daniel is going to recap what he saw. He is just speaking what he saw in verses 2 through 14. He's giving a recapitulation. He's going to receive additional vision. Most people don't catch this. They don't think about Daniel seeing additional vision, but it says, and I beheld. This is part of the interpretation, or this is more of the vision given to Daniel so that he can see more about it. And then finally, in verses 23 through 27, we will notice a final interpretation. Throughout every one of those, you will see this important thing: recapitulation with focused escalation. Recapitulation with focused escalation. It will be repeated sometimes by Daniel, sometimes by the angel, but there's going to be focus, and it's escalated. A lot of times people don't understand what's going on there. They think they're reading this in a chronological way. If you read this in a chronological way, it won't make sense. Neither the book of Daniel nor the chapter of Daniel chapter 7 is chronological. It is arranged topically in this format, which we call chiasm. You can call it a pyramid structure. You can call it whatever you want to. It's this structure right here where you have parallels with one another. You might notice that it's not a clean verse for verse. Chiasm is rarely verse for verse. A lot of times it is a section of verses with a section of verses. You'll notice here that I want you to understand these blocks together. That needs to be understood as blocks together, not verse for verse. Let's get into the meat now. The sea beast, verses 2 through 7. Let's notice a few things here. Daniel looks down upon this chaotic sea. The first thing that we might notice, Nathan already mentioned, I appreciate. In chapter 2, we notice that the perspective is from man. Nebuchadnezzar looks up at this great image, and you know what he sees? He sees the marvels of man. He sees precious metals from this world, which represent the power of humanity. You know what God sees? He looks down and he sees beast. We'll get to that in a moment when we talk about world government. But first of all, the perspective in chapter 7 is from heaven. In Daniel chapter 10 through 12, it is both from earth and heaven. In verse 4, we will notice that Daniel is standing next to the river of the Hiddekel, or the Tigris. The only other place that river is mentioned is in the Garden of Eden. That's it. That's it. Why in the world would this river come back up in Daniel? The river has no other significance. It is just mentioned in the Garden of Eden. This is to take our mind back to the beginning. And also to take our mind to the new beginning. To take our mind to the new beginning. In verse 21, however, the angel is going to come to Daniel and he's going to tell Daniel, I'm going to tell you the truth of those things which are coming in the latter days. Now we have a perspective of heaven. I'm introducing now Revelation. Now Daniel is used a tremendous amount in the Revelation. You should study the Danielology of the Revelation because there is so much similarity between the two. Can you understand Daniel without the Revelation? I would argue that it would be near to impossible. Not because it's not useful for those people who had Daniel before the revelation, but because we have progressive revelation. And that's what the revelation is. The revelation is the summation of everything else which has been told. It is the summary of the Bible story. And so we can use revelation to help us understand Daniel, at the same time use Daniel to help us understand the revelation. Of course, the perspective in the revelation is that of heaven. Let's notice God's sovereignty. This is spoken of in these verses right here. In chapter 2, we might notice that Daniel comes to Nebuchadnezzar, and in these verses, verse 37, verse 36 as well, he's going to tell Nebuchadnezzar that he's the King of Kings. He's going to say that God has made you the King of Kings. God in heaven has given you glory and honor and dominion. Who has given you that? God. God is sovereign. Chapter 2. In chapter 7, we see this scene of the four winds blowing over this tumultuous sea. The four winds in Revelation chapter 7 and verse 1. Here we see the angels of the Lord who hold back the four winds of heaven, and chaos is coming. The point is, God's in control. God is sovereign. When we see these four winds in Daniel chapter 7, this is God letting those angels blow it. He's letting the chaos occur. He's allowing it to occur. Not that he's causing it, but he is allowing it. In Daniel chapter 10, Daniel 10 through 12, the angel is going to say to Daniel that I will return and fight. He's going to say that he has come to Daniel and that he has been fighting. He has been delayed by the prince of Persia, and he has to go and fight the prince of Greece. Here, the angel of the Lord is saying that he's going to fight demonic forces. You know what he's implying? That he's in control. He's in control. God is sovereign. World government. World government is absolutely in view throughout the book of Daniel. Babylon is introduced in chapter 1. The first man-made world government was in Genesis chapter 6 at the Tower of Babel. That's the first, world government. And that's what we're supposed to think about whenever we see Babylon introduced in Daniel chapter 1. And then we see government after government after government throughout Daniel. God has interest in world government. And God's perspective here, as he looks down, he sees a tumultuous sea. This tumultuous sea represents the chaotic pull of humanity. And from that chaotic pull of humanity, the governments will rise. And that's exactly what happens in this world. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's perspective, of course, in chapter 2, world government to him is the crown of humanity. Whoever has the most power in this world is the greatest. That's what everyone wants. They want to live in that country that has the most power. They want to be a part of that government that has the most power. In chapters 10 through 12, we see typical war carried out. Now, it also will be specific. We'll get to that in a moment. But we see the king of the north and the king of the south in chapter 7. This would be the Ptolemies to the south and the Seleucids to the north. They are going to be fighting back and forth. That is typical world government. That's what world governments do. They fight over precious resources, over land. That's what they do. That's what the precious metals are about. They want to have all of that. We might notice that God's government, that thing which exists before the throne of God, Revelation chapter 4, there's a sea of glass. Not a tumultuous sea, but a sea of glass. And this is calm. This is the presence of God. This is the government of God. We notice specific world governments. In chapter 2, we notice that Nebuchadnezzar was this head of gold. We see this body of silver. We see this kind of mid-section of bronze. And then we see these legs of iron. This is parallel to what we see in chapter 7, amongst the beast. These are specific world nations. Nebuchadnezzar is said to be the head of gold. In verse 17 of Daniel chapter 7, the angel says these are nations. We don't have to guess about what they are. They are nations. Chapter 8 helps us a little bit here, because in chapter 2 and chapter 7, we're not told about the other nations, who they are. But chapter 8 clearly tells us. Gabriel says that this is Medo-Persia and this is Greece. Verses 20 and 21. I do think that we can appropriately extrapolate that from chapter 8 and apply it to both chapter 2 and chapter 7 to say that the bear and to say that the leopard in chapter 7 is Medo-Persia and Greece, respectfully. Now, in Daniel chapter 10, chapters 10 through 12, we'll notice that there are specific nations here too. We talked about that, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. I have a question here which we'll come back to. We talked about Revelation up to this point. What about this beast from the sea in Revelation chapter 13? Is this a government? We'll come back. Then I would know the truth of the other. In verse 19, I know we jumped forward. We'll come back. In verse 19, Daniel's going to see the entire vision. He's going to get an interpretation. But after all of that, he's asking the same question that every one of you have come to hear. What about that little horn? What about that little horn? Isn't that the question we always ask about Daniel chapter 7? Well, that's what Daniel wants to know. After all he sees, he wants to know about this little horn. Well, the original description is there in verse 8. In verse 8, it's called the little horn. It has the eyes of a man and a mouth. In verse 11, it says that it spoke great words. This is amazing to me. Daniel is going to be distracted from the throne of God. He sees the throne of God. But yet, he's distracted away from that. Could you imagine seeing the glory of God and anything in this world being capable of distracting you from that? Daniel is distracted by the great words which are spoken. Daniel, in his recap, he's going to say whose look was more stout than his fellows. In the vision, in the explanation of this, or the interpretation, we're going to be told that this little horn is going to wage war and is going to prevail. Furthermore, in the additional interpretation, he will subdue, speak great words, wear out the saints, it says. Think to change times and law. You know the other place that verbiage is used, changed, one who is to change time and law? Daniel, whenever he prays in Daniel chapter 2, after he gives God the glory for revealing the dream to him, he's going to say to God that you change the time and the law. This little horn thinks he can do it. He wants to be like God, thinks he is God. In Daniel chapter 11, now, I've already mentioned that in the early part of Daniel chapter 11, we know specifically the king of the north and the king of the south. Those are representing Greek dynasties. However, in verse 36, the language will change from the king of the north and the king of the south to the king. And the descriptors are going to change here. As I said, Daniel chapter 7 is a parallel to chapters 10 through 12, the final vision. So those things which are said in Daniel chapter 7, we should look for similar things in chapter 11. In chapter 11, verse 36, it says about the king, he shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself, magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that time is determined shall be done. I want us to notice the language from Revelation chapter 13 that sounds so similar to the language that we just read right here. In verse 2, first of all, we're going to see some animals which look like the animals which came from the sea. This beast in Revelation 13 is going to look like a leopard. His feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him power in his seat, and gave him great authority. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, to overcome them. And the power was given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. That too is a buzz phrase. We see that phrase all the time throughout Daniel: kindreds, tongues, and nations. Notice how similar that language is, especially to verses 24 through 25 of Daniel chapter 7. Is this the Antichrist? Is this the Antichrist? This is often the question that we'll ask as we study this material. We think about that Antichrist in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 18. We think about that man of perdition in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that man of sin there. Well, the language is similar. In verse 4 of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. That is exactly the description that we read both in Revelation chapter 13 and in Daniel chapter 11, verse 36. They have some striking similarity. So that he, as God, sitteth on the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders. Sometimes we get hung up, in my opinion, in 1 John chapter 2, because John is going to mention the many antichrists. Some would say there's no singular antichrist, because John mentions that there are multiple antichrists. It's fair, he clearly mentions that. But he says, that Antichrist of which you heard. From who? Where did they hear that? Where did they hear that? From somewhere. Now, it might have been an unreliable source, but it might have been from Old Testament prophecy. They may have thought that there was one who was coming because they had read that in some place, or it had been inferred from some place. I do not think the language here is necessarily implying that it is excluding that Antichrist. My opinion, I think that this Antichrist is one and the same as that man of perdition of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 13. I'll probably get challenged on that, and I've probably gone outside my realm on that. Maybe we can ask George more about it since he's studying on that later on. Is this the Catholic Church? This is what I've been taught in the past, that this Antichrist or man of perdition, that this is the Catholic Church. You'll have to be in suspense because we're not going there now. Perhaps we will. Let's move on into the throne room. Verses 9 through 14. Now, this is an interesting arrangement right here. A lot of times when we read about judgment or something like that, we automatically think, well, the whole thing has to be discussing judgment, or the whole thing has to be talking about enthronement. I believe in these verses right here, we are oscillating between inauguration or the opening of the kingdom and the consummation or the closing of the kingdom and the in-between. I think we're talking about all of it. The judgment is mentioned clearly in verses 9 through 10. The Ancient of Days did sit. Clearly, this is God on his throne. However, in verse 10b, this language, thousands, is going to be mentioned, which in Revelation chapter 5 is used in the context of the enthronement of the Lamb. This is where the Lamb is the only one who is found worthy to come before the throne and to take the book. This is a striking scene between the two. We know that enthronement is within the context, as we'll notice in verse 13 in just a moment. Before we get there, we will go back to judgment. Verses 10c, judgment was set and the books were opened. The same language will be used in chapter 12. That's not surprising because they are sister chapters. And then also that same language is used in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 12. Revelation 20 and verse 12 is clearly talking about the end time judgment, the eschatological judgment. And I think because this language is so similar and the scene is so similar that the two are connected. We're going to fall back now for just a moment to the time of war. This is the time in which we live. In verses 11a, we're going to fall back now to that period of time in which the little horn is waging war. He's immediately going to be judged. That's a summary. There's some in-between that's going on. But it's a quick summary between 11a and 11b. Notice in verse 12 that the other beasts are going to persist. Man, that's strange. Why would those other beasts persist? It says that they will be allowed to persist for some period of time, a season, it will say. I think because this is oscillation. The period of time in which they persist is this time. It's this time. Their influence is persisting. Do we still have Greece? Do we still have Medo-Persia? Do we still have Babylon? Obviously, they're gone. But their influence still persists. Their influence absolutely still persists. In verse 13, the one like it to the Son of Man approaches, the Ancient of Days. This is clearly talking about the Messiah, not coming from heaven to earth. This is talking about the Messiah coming from earth and going to heaven. I'll notice this in just a moment as Jesus will speak to it. In verse 14, it's going to talk about the glory which will come after his enthronement. Is this the glory that came at his enthronement, or is this the glory that's going to come whenever his saints shall inherit the kingdom, or shall possess, fully, past tense, possess the kingdom? The interpretation seems to imply that this is describing glory which is going to come when the saints fully possess, past tense, kingdom is closed. The citizens have been glorified. The interpretation later on by the angel seems to be implying that. Judgment in Daniel. We already noticed verse 10, verse 32, verse 26. That language of judgment, strikingly similar to that language used in Revelation chapter 20. Enthronement language, verse 13. The one like unto the man approaches, the Ancient of Days. Strikingly similar to this scene in Revelation chapter 5, 7 through 8. In chapter 5, verse 10, we are told that we would be made unto us, our God, kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. Right now, we are a royal priesthood, 2 Peter chapter 2. Right now, we're on the earth, but we have not yet been glorified. You see, it's not talking about our glorification yet. Right now, we're in the period of war. But we are priests, nonetheless. Everyone here who has obeyed the gospel are new creatures. You're new creatures, but you're not a glorified new creature. And I'm not a glorified new creature yet. Coming or going. Sometimes, whenever the Son of Man is riding on the cloud, sometimes he is coming to bring judgment. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 14. He comes with a sickle in his hand. That's judgment. He's coming to the earth for judgment. However, in chapter 7 and verse 13, he's coming to heaven to be enthroned as the king. The one likened to the Son of Man. We see that we see this progressive or this escalation from chapter 2 through chapter 7 and through chapter 10 through 12. He's a certain man in chapter 10, verse 5, girded with a gold belt. Jesus will give us an interpretation in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 64. Jesus is going to couple Psalms chapter 110, as he would come to the right hand of the power of God, he would do so on the clouds of heaven. He is going to connect Daniel chapter 7 and verse 13 with Psalms 110 and 1. Here are some descriptors about the Son of Man. Most people will not argue that the stone cut without hands in chapter 2 is any different than the one likened to the Son of Man in chapter 7. Most people would agree with that. The eternality of both of these figures is described in both chapters. The power of these figures are described in both chapters. In chapter 12 and verse 2, the eternality will be described in such a way that this person, with the assistance of Michael, the archangel, is going to bring about everlasting life. Everlasting life. It's eternal. In verse 1, he's going to say that he will deliver because he has the power to do so. Notice the appearance. In chapter 2, it's somewhat bland, cut without hands. In chapter 7, likened to the Son of Man. In chapter 10 through 12, it's getting a little more colorful, girded with a fine gold, face, eyes, brilliance. All of those things are emphasized, and a voice like multitudes. Notice the similarity in Revelation 1 and 13. He's called the Son of Man, wearing the golden girdle, eyes, brilliance, and voice like many waters. The role, a crushing defeat in chapter 2, approaching the Ancient of Days in chapter 7. The one in chapter 10 is a warrior. He's a warrior. I return to fight. He is a truth revealer. I show thee the truth. In Revelation 5 and 5, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, he hath prevailed to open the book. The one who stands upon the waters in chapter 12. Chapter 12, this angel is going to stand upon the waters with his arms to heaven, and he's going to be the one who will declare the time of the end, or declare the times. In Revelation chapter 10, if you take the position that this angel in Revelation chapter 10 is the Messiah, then it has striking similarity too, though I know there's some debate on that. He stands on the waters and the earth, declaring the time of the end. Won't you consider the similarity between what Daniel experiences in Daniel chapter 10 and what the Apostle Paul experiences whenever he sees Jesus? Here's a question. How long? Revelation chapter 6 and verse 10. How long? You know, Daniel is going to be asked, he's going to ask that same question. It will be asked on his behalf. An angel is going to come to Daniel in Daniel chapter 12, or come to the one who stands on the waters in Daniel chapter 12, and ask on behalf of Daniel, how long shall these things be? The period of time of how long is our time? It's the open kingdom period. It's the open kingdom period. We see judgment in Daniel 7. We see a season in verse 12. We see enthronement. We see glorification. There's a time in between. In chapter 2, it's called the latter days. In chapter 7, time, and half a time. In chapter 10, also called time, times, and half a time. It's called the latter days also in chapter 10. If we go to Revelation, we see the same verbiage used. In Revelation chapter 12 and verse 14, you remember this scene. The woman in the wilderness who represents the church, she will flee, and the dragon will come after her. For how long? 3.5 times, for time, and half a time. That's a recapitulation of what is said at the early part of Revelation chapter 12, where that number is 1,260 days. That number is going to be used in Revelation chapter 13 to talk about the period of time in which those witnesses, which represent the faithful church, will speak the truth and teach the gospel. They will do so for how long? 1,260 days. It will be the period of time in which the Gentiles shall be in the outer court. It's a recapitulation of the verse before. 42 months. In Revelation chapter 13 and verse 5, that period of time in which the beast from the sea will wage war upon us is 42 months. These are all the same number. None of them are literal. None of them are literal. They are all figurative. Here's my opinion of how they are figurative. The period 3.5 times is half a full dispensation of time. I believe that the full entire time of humanity is represented by the number 7. It is the entire period of time, and all time is separated by the cross. I'm not saying that those numbers are exact or literal in any way. I'm saying the cross marked the division between the former days and the latter days. We are in the latter days, that 1260, that 42 months, that last days. We are in the war period. We are in the open kingdom period. At the end of Daniel, there's going to be some numbers which throw off every commentator you could imagine. Everyone will have their own commentary on what these numbers mean. Some they take literal. Most of them they take literal. 1,290 days from the time of the abomination. The abomination is the time that Antiochus Epiphanes is going to defile the temple. That's what's being described by the angel as he speaks to Daniel. This is the answer to how long. He says 1,290 days from the time of the abomination. 1290 is slightly longer than 1260. I think that's it. I think that it's just describing that it's slightly longer. Then he turns around and tells Daniel that it shall be 1335 days. Blessed is he that waiteth. Who's he talking about? Daniel. Daniel is the blessed one. He called Daniel the blessed one earlier. He's saying that the time of the end is not right now. It's not right now, Daniel, and it doesn't start at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. It's slightly longer than those periods of time. Made war, we're getting close. Made war with the saints and prevailed. We see that this little horn is going to do this, and not just that period of time, but the war is going to start with the time of that last kingdom, which we'll talk more about in just a moment. Made war with the saints and prevailed, shall wear out the saints of the Most High. You think about that. That's what's going on. Satan attempts to wear us out. That's what he wants to do. He wants to wear us out so that we will get tired and we will give up, and some have and some do. That's what's going on. And think to change times and law, and they shall be given into his hand. In chapter 11, prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. He shall enter also into the glorious land. I think that is describing this little horn as he pushes against and comes into the church. This shall be a time of trouble, such that never was since there was a nation, even till that time. Revelation 11, make war, overcome, kill. Chapter 12, went to make war. 13:7, to make war and to overcome. 15, as many as would not worship would be killed, that no man might buy or sell, save he that have the mark of the name of the beast. He's having assistance from the beast from the land in that last verse. This right here is my chiasm. This is not a divine chiasm. This right here is my chiasm as I think about the big picture of what we have talked about. Daniel talks about my cognitions much troubled me at the end of Daniel chapter 7. Even though he's seen the hope, Roger talked about we win. We win. That's not pushed in chapter 7. The we win is not pushed. Daniel sees it though. He sees that we win. But he's still troubled. Why is he troubled? Daniel sees what we're going through. He sees the period of war. In chapter 12, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. This is the angel telling Daniel about the time of the end, or telling him about the last days. This is what's going to happen. Many shall run to and fro. Knowledge shall be increased. Isn't that what people do? People run back and forth, and they live their lives, do their thing. Many shall be purified, made white, tried. But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. But the wise shall understand. We share that sentiment. We see it taught by the Apostle Paul. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 13. Evil men and seducers shall grow worse and worse. We're heading for a worse and worse. It's not getting better. It's going to get worse. The sentiment in Revelation chapter 13 is the same, and he'll say, here is wisdom. What's that mean? In chapter 12 and verse 12, the angel will say to Daniel, blessed is he that waiteth and overcometh. Whenever we experience that wearing out of the saints, we talked about the younger generations, the older generations. I'm getting off topic for a moment here. One of the beautiful things about the book of Daniel is we get to see Daniel from his youth. He was probably 14 or 15 years old when he was taken into Babylonian captivity. And whenever he is praying, whenever Darius had issued the decree that you shall not worship, Daniel's probably in his 80s. We see the whole life of Daniel. And we see Daniel being faithful to the end. We see him faithful as a 14, 15-year-old boy. We see him faithful throughout his life. And we see him faithful unto the end. And the Lord comes to Daniel, and he tells Daniel in these last times, when he continues to be troubled, the vision of chapter 10 is opened with Daniel being troubled. He'd been fasting for 21 days, and he's extremely troubled. At the end of this vision, the angel is telling him, blessed is he that waiteth and overcometh. What are we told in Revelation chapter 3, verse 21 and 21:7? He or him that overcometh. In the middle of Revelation chapter 15, when he's talking about the war that's coming upon the saints, he's going to say, here's the faith and patience of the saints. In this period of war, here's the faith and patience of the saints. In chapter 12 and verse 11, he'll tell Daniel, go your way. Go your way. He'll tell him, rest, you shall stand. Revelation chapter 7, 9 through 17. These verses right here is the verses of hope that we've already talked about today. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and peoples and tongues. That language is throughout Daniel. Stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands, and cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, which sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb. And all the angels stood round about the throne and about the elders and the four beasts, and fell before the throne on their faces and worshipped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be unto our God forever and ever. Amen. And one of the elders answered, saying unto me, What are these which are arrayed in white robes? And whence came they? And I said unto him, Sir, thou knowest. And he said unto me, These are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore are they before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in the temple, and he that sitteth on the throne shall dwell among them. And they shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb, which is in the midst of the throne, shall feed them, and shall lead them unto the living fountains of waters. And God shall wipe away all the tears from their eyes. It's my opinion that it is the angel of the Lord Jesus Christ who appears before Daniel and gives him that very admonition at the end of his life. There's my resources so that you know who has influenced me.